Last night we were talking about, is this pretty loud? So last night we were talking about the Ipwar Papyrus, and it's at the Royal Dutch Museum. I had it in on this presentation, and so it's inside that building there. So we got up to Moses last night, and I took a course, and the professor's name was Bob Breyer. And his claim to fame is he and his colleague named Ronald Wade. He's jumping around back there, I think. Is it too loud? It's getting some buzzing. It's got some buzzing on it. So anyway, so they had been researching on how to make an Egyptian mummy, the way the Egyptians did it. And the thing of it is it was passed down orally. They didn't write any of it down. However, there were a few outsiders that came through and made notes. And so they had records of this. One was Herodotus, the Greek historian. So they got permission from the Egyptian government to go and do that. And so they went over in 1994 because you need the climate there in Egypt to do it. And they did it. They did their mummy, and they get to the end, and he says it was in the Bible the whole time. So there's two parts of the process. And the first part is getting the organs out and doing everything, and that takes exactly 40 days. No more, no less, 40 days. And the second half is they had a law in Egypt, no one could be buried until the 70th day. And so the second half is 30-day period. If you go to Genesis chapter 50, verses 2 and 3, and it says, "And Joseph had Jacob, his father, embalmed after the manner of the Egyptians for 40 days. And then he takes him to the cave, back to the cave of Ephron, where Abraham had purchased the cave, to bury him. And he buries him on the 70th day. And Bob Breyer says, the Bible was there the whole time. And he said, we didn't look at it. So to me, that's one of those things that kind of geeks me out. The other thing that Bob Breyer pointed out is that when the Bible talks about how the grain coffers were measured using the scepter, but also the king's signet ring, and when Joseph was given the second chariot, remember that? And people ran, and they said, in the King James Version, and I think other versions say, bow the knee to his chariot. Actually, in the Egyptian, Ab-Bi-Ra is sort of the name, and that if you look it up in the Strong's, it says meaning unknown or uncertain. But Bob Breyer says, well, if you sound it out in Egyptian, it means heart to you. And he said that was an Egyptian phrase, and it's like what the British say, God save the king or queen. They would say something like that it's like an ab for you, and heart to you is what it means. And it means long live the king or whoever you are. So Bob Breyer says that the writer of the Genesis account and the Exodus account had high-level understanding of the inner workings of the upper echelon of the government. And that didn't just come you know, so it's not like this is made up. So tonight, what we want to look at, clicker, there it is. I let it set too long. I had this working really good a while ago. So we're going to look at what's called the Amarna period. After so there's some things we can look at the that would relate to the wilderness wanderings, but then we're going to get to the Amarna period, and we want to look at that. Let me go back here. When they come out of the land and they're given the law there on the Mount Sinai, God tells them to remember the Sabbath day, the seventh day, and keep it holy. Okay, and that was set up from the beginning, seasons, days, and years. I never given this much thought, and then I was doing a course and I was doing some research, and the Egyptians, they had 10-day calendar at this time. And so the seventh day for them would have not been, it would just been another day of the week. So they have 30 days a month, and they only have 3 seasons. The first season is the flood or inundation, then the planting season, and then the harvest. And on some crops, they could get 2 per year. And they didn't need it to rain because they relied on the flooding of the Nile River to take care of the irrigation for them. So when they come out of the land, God gives them a new calendar, and it's on a 7-day, and it's based on a lunar cycle. And so they've kind of gotten off track, most likely, if they had been having some dealings there with the Egyptians. And so there was a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day, and he broke the law. And a lot of times people see that and they think, well, that's pretty strict, And if only we could take the Bible today as seriously as it was, meant to be understood. When you look at this, why is it strict? God said, don't do it. And this person was made an example. They didn't go out stoning everybody after that, although they wanted to sometimes. But God is getting them back, most likely, to the schedule that He wants them on. Because that schedule, what's going to happen? He's going to set up the Passover, and He's going to set up Pentecost. And those are foreshadowing what? The death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ. And the Passover, and it's going to be on the Sabbath day. Now, there are 3 covenants. There is 3 ages, and there's the patriarchs, then there is the Mosaical, and then there's the New Testament. Only the Mosaic they were commanded to keep the Sabbath day. And it was only given to the Israelites. It makes good sense to me that God would want His people observing that 7th day when Jesus was in the grave. He wouldn't want any activity. He wouldn't want God, what happened to the land? There was darkness over the land when Jesus was on the cross from 3 until 6 o'clock. So it just makes good sense that God would not want. And then the Pentecost being 50 days after, and that's when the church is established. And so that is it's in their calendar. They think of those days every year. And so anyway, there's one particular animal that the Egyptians worshipped as a god. Now, people say, well, look at the Egyptian gods. They all have animal features. And yeah, but they didn't think of them as being animals. They just thought the gods had that sort of shape. When the Greeks came in and the Greek pantheon lines up with the Egyptian, when the Greeks were in control, they changed everything and they got rid of all of the animal heads that the Egyptians worshipped and made them Greek-headed. But there was one animal they worshipped as an animal, and that's called the Apis bull. And you see it buried with some of the pharaohs. And there is an area where they have these bulls mummified, and there's like 30 or 40 of these in this area where these bulls are mummified. The way the Apis bull was chosen is when there would be lightnings and thunderings, they would go and look for a new calf that looked like it had been stricken by lightning. And I don't know how they could tell, but one that looked like it had a mark on it from lightning, and that would be the new Apis bull. It was seen as something of fertility and strength, and there was a debaucherous party that ensued for days, and people would expose themselves to this bull and to give them fertility. And one of the Persian kings, when the Persians controlled Egypt, he came when this festival was going on, and he saw what he saw, he said, "What is this?" And they said, "It's the Apis bull festival for the new Apis bull." And he said, "Bring me the bull." And he killed it to stop the debauchery. And so when you look at these, and then when you consider Exodus, when the children of Israel come out, and then there's the thunderings and the lightnings, are they doing something that they had seen the Egyptians do, but it was God doing these things? And then they make a golden calf, and they're doing dancing, they are naked, and there might be a possible link between that as to why they made a golden calf. That's the only explanation I have for why they did a golden calf. There may be others, but before they make the articles for the tabernacle, they take their earrings, or the gold they had, and they make this golden calf, and an idolatrous thing. Okay. So we looked at the Exodus. So now we want to look tonight at this Amarna period here. And the way it falls right now, I believe it should happen in the reign of Akhenaten, because the letters come to him. So at the moment, it's 61 years off from the Egyptian chronology, which is getting pretty close now. I mean, so it's fallen in. I bought a book that has the Amarna letters translated in them. There's some 300 letters. And I actually went through and read all of these letters, and I highlighted every time the Hebrews are mentioned. And there's a way to do that, because if you know what the Egyptians called Hebrews and what the Canaanites called Hebrews, it's easy to spot. Then I went through and I looked at the segments of the letters that talk about where the Hebrews are mentioned. And so I'm building a case here. So they're going to sound repetitive, but I'm trying to prove a point. So let's take a look and let's see if we can get in there. Before we do that, I mentioned last night that is Ramses the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Well, he comes way too late. And Ramses is a place before there are pharaohs named Ramses. In the land of Ramses. So he wasn't the Pharaoh, and he wouldn't come till much later. So the land is called Ramesses. And I said last night, when Ramses the first He was a scribe, and then he was, the previous Pharaoh did not have any heirs, so he became the Pharaoh. He had grown up in Ramses, and he takes that name for his dynasty. Treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. We don't think Pithom is a person, but we tend to think Ramses is a person. They journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. They're going from one place to the other, not from a Pharaoh to the other place. The children of Israel never came before Pharaoh. It was only Moses and Aaron. So again, it's a place. And they don't come until 1292, Ramses the first, and then Ramses the second. But it is Sete, the son of Ramses, that takes all of this period out of their history. They rip it out. Anything to do with the Hyksos and Akhenaten, they just totally rip it out. And we looked last night, and the dynasties go from 12 to 19. And they just erased all that history because they don't like that period. We talked last night that the Hyksos are more than likely the Israelites. And I think the evidence is overwhelming that they are. So you have if I go back and then forward, it seems to help. Amenhotep III, his capital is at Thebes. His wife is called Tia. Her mummy is famous because she was known for having beautiful hair, and her mummy is just full of hair. And they have their son, Amenhotep IV. But when he becomes Pharaoh, he changes his title to Akhenaten. And Akhenaten is Aten is the one God. He goes to a monotheistic worship. And the priests and all the temples of the other gods hate him. He's not well liked, and he's a hated Pharaoh. And the art style changes during his period. Everything changes, and it's just very different. His queen is Nefertiti. He moves the capital and builds a new capital in a place called Amarna, and it's on the other side of the Nile. And Sete and the general that was under Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, they go up later and they destroy and bury Amarna because they hate this so much, okay? Akhenaten, if you look at this style, this is not like other Egyptian art. They're kind of like pot-bellied. They have two daughters, Nefertiti and himself, and they look kind of like little aliens when you look at them there. And then it's showing the god Aten, the sun god, more or less, and it has hands giving them blessings. But he goes to a one god worship. Now, why would somebody abruptly do that unless something happened that would make them want to change their whole system? This is from a temple or a burial area and a tomb, and again, the faces and everything are just totally different. So the Amarna letters were discovered in 1887. They found a few more later, and they're clay tablets. They're written in cuneiform and not Egyptian because they're coming from, they have letters from the Assyrians, they have letters from some of what is now called the Hittites, and then they do have a couple of letters from Babylon. So they had people that could translate all these things, and they were in a library because they're all together when they find them. Some are broken, and some are in pretty good shape. So they look like this, and they're numbered E means letter, epistle. So epistle, Armana, and then they have a number that goes behind that. So again, you've got Akhenaten is during this period, and Tutankhamun. And in the Bible, the word Hebrew comes from the Hebrew word Ibri. If you look it up in the original Hebrew, it's Ibri. It's 34 times in the Old Testament. First time it's used of Abraham, and Abraham does not call himself a Hebrew. It means one from beyond or a foreigner. You're not from around here, are you? And the second time it's used of Joseph. Potiphar's wife says that Hebrew, and they don't refer to themselves as Hebrews until you get to 1 Kings. So it was more of a, if you will, a derogatory term. The Egyptian equivalent to Ibri is Aparu. And it worked because it means they're nomads or mercenaries or people who are not part of the cultural society. And if the Hyksos are indeed the Hebrews, and they were apart and they were in Avaris, as we looked at last night, then it makes sense that they would use this word. Bob Breyer, Egyptologist, says this is what Egyptians called the Israelites for Hebrew. The Assyrian word that is akin to this is called Habiru. And their definition in their language, they're rebels, outlaws, raiders, mercenaries, bowmen, servants, slaves, laborers. When the Israelites come out of Egypt, what had they been doing? They had been laboring for the Pharaoh. They were slaves, and they come out of the land of Egypt. So when I went through the Armana letters, I looked for Aparu or Habaru because it's talking about the Hebrew. Okay, so we could identify that. So what we have here is a map of what we know as Palestine area, and I will have where the letters from up here, and then a line showing the location. Some locations we don't have, we don't know where they are because they may not exist any longer. Sidon, Tyre and Sidon. So Tyre was an island off the coast, and Sidon was its sister city on the coast, and so it was on the mainland. Okay, these are Canaanite cities. They are Phoenician cities. The Greeks called Canaanites Phoenicians. And it has something to do with red. So it's either they had a red pottery that they made, or they may have had a reddish colored skin, some scholars think. But the Phoenicians went all over the Mediterranean. They were the merchants of the ancient world. They took the cedars of Lebanon everywhere in the ancient world. So we're looking at Sidon. So the king, okay, this is another thing to point out. Going back when Joseph was in charge, remember people would come and buy grain, and at first they were bringing some type of thing to exchange that was like money. Then they were doing their animals, and then they ran out of things. They only had their land. And so they exchanged, and so Joseph took all the land that they exchanged, and it was for Pharaoh. There is a place in Egyptian history where people owned property, and then all of a sudden it stopped, and the Pharaoh began owning property. When these letters come from Canaan, this area, they're telling the Pharaoh, Akhenaten, this is your land. And they call themselves mayors. In the Bible, they're called kings when they do the conquest. It just means ruler, okay? So the rulers of the city. But it seems that the Egyptian reach in these letters, that it goes right along with what the Bible says of Joseph buying the land for Pharaoh, because they're telling the Pharaoh, this is your land and you're not going to protect it. Okay? All the cities the king put in my charge have been joined to the Apru. And every time you see that, just the Hebrew. May the king put me in charge of a man that will lead the archers of the king to call to account cities that have been joined to the Apru. So as you go through these letters, you're going to see they're going to be requesting chariots or archers to come, or to let Pharaoh give the mayor, or whatever they call themselves, charge over the archers to fight against these people. Tyre. Now, Tyre would have been hard to get to. And by the way, what we know as Israel and Judah in the Old Testament, that wasn't the promised land they had been promised. They've been promised land all the way over to the Euphrates. They were supposed to take the cedars of Lebanon. They were supposed to go on up and go on over, and they never did. And so they got about half of what they were supposed to, that God had given them. Oh, I went the wrong direction. Sorry. Okay, so he has taken over the land, and may the king, the commissioner. So they're sending these letters, and they're giving out warnings. Kadesh, thought to be maybe way up there. My brother has turned over all the men of the cities of the king to the Apru. Hasi, which is up in that area, it's believed. The Apru waged war against me and captured the cities of the king. Now, the book of Joshua doesn't show these areas, because you're going to see that some of these probably were won back by the local people. The Apru captured, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but they plundered and set it up in flames. And they captured Gil-Unu and plundered and set it up in flames. When you talk to scholars, historians of this time period, and you ask them about the Amarna letters, if they don't believe in the Bible, they're going to say, well, the time doesn't match up, and that the Apru are just some local, like, Jesse James gang that's going around. Well, they're sending up a whole town in flames. So this is a sizable group of people, and they're there to fight. They captured Usta, plundered and set it up in flames. 186 repeats. It's almost a copy exactly of this. And again, another one from Kadesh. And we see that there are individuals that, as you go through the letters, you find that they're working with the Apru to, like, spy on the cities for the Apru. And then this says, I restored from the Apru the cities of the king. Now, if that is indeed the Hebrews, then they may have captured the city, but then they lost it back. I disbanded the Apru, and that's up in that area. And they were supposed to take the promised land all the way to the Euphrates River. They gave king's horses and a chariot to the Apru. May the king look carefully to his land, lest the enemies take it. Ashtoreth. Puher has not protected me, lost to the Apru. Megiddo. Now that's one we know. I'm indeed guarding Megiddo by day. I guard it from the fields with chariots, and by nights on the walls. The warring of the Apru in the land is severe. This is a lot of people that are fighting. It's not some little band of warriors. And they don't know where this is from, but evidently he had gotten a letter from Akhenaten, and it says, guard the men who seized the city. How am I to guard such men? It was in war that the city was seized. And that was these coming up. When they came into the land, these are the mounts of the cursing and the blessing. And Shechem is in this area, and it's in this area that Jacob had a well, Jacob's well. And so I believe in this area, that's where the Samaritan woman was. And so as we look here, Shechem, and that's what we were just looking at. I did not know my son was consorting with the Aparu. I herewith hand him over to, and this is probably some Egyptian general or soldier or something. Gezer. I know that the war against me and against the Gath, is what it is severe. May the king save his land from the power of the Aparu, otherwise my lord send chariots to fetch us, lest our servants kill us. So this is very severe things going on. There's another letter. Know that the mayors that were in the major cities are gone. The entire land of the king is deserted to the Aparu. Inquire the commissioner about what is to be done in the land. My lord instruct his archers in regard. You know, when you go through and you look at the book of Joshua and then you get into Judges, early on they start off pretty good when they're in the conquest. But remember, they got fooled, and the name just slipped me of the tribe of the Canaanites that came down, and they pretended to be from afar, and they made an alliance with them. Yeah, and if you find it, you can tell me. So they had moldy bread and everything, and they took them in. Well, when we see that you get to the book of Judges, they left a lot of people in the land because they thought, well, we'll let them raise the food and we'll just tax them or take some of the food that they raise. And that was not what God had intended, but it's what they did, and they started picking up habits of the Canaanites. Gibeonites. And it was Saul then later took a backwards approach to the Gibeonites since they had made that oath with them, and he started killing the Gibeonites, and David had to get that corrected. This is from the queen and possibly Gath. Know that the war has been raged in the land of the king, my lord, and by desertion to the Aparu. Now, this queen, and this is from one of the encyclopedias on the Bible, they think that she could be the queen of Zephon, and she reports about in this valley, Ajalon, and it is there that where Joshua fights, and he fights the Amorites, and it was there that Joshua asked God to hold the sun and the moon, and the day was lengthened so that they could finish up. And it was in the tribal area of part of Dan. But Dan ends up in this area, they end up getting dissolved into the Canaanites over time, and they had that other area up north, north of Galilee, that they took. May the king, my lord, save his land from the power of the Aparu, lest it be lost. Saphon has been taken. The land of the king is gone. And so they're going to go to the other city. May the king listen to his mayors so that we may attack them. Be informed, I am alone. So by this time, it's already too late. I am alone. May the king, my lord, send a very large archer force that it may save me. He's just trying to get out at this point. So this letter, it says, be informed that the Aparu rose up against the lands and I smote them. Only Abdi-Heba and I have been at war with the Aparu. And then he mentions the ruler of Akka and then the ruler of Aksappa have come to my aid. So the one here in the green is the king of Jerusalem. And we're going to look at that in a moment. And then this city is also mentioned. So in Easton's Bible dictionary, they knew of these letters. They identify Abdi-Heba as Adonai-Zedek. And that's one of the kings of the 5. Now, Adonai-Zedek was king of Jerusalem, or mayor of Jerusalem, and he came out with 4 other kings to fight Joshua there in the valley. And they ended up defeating them, and they take the kings and they put them into a cave and roll a stone over the cave's mouth. And so you may want to remember that. And then this is a royal city of the Canaanites, and the name of that city means sorcery. And it becomes a boundary line of the tribe of Asher. So these names that are popping up, and we're seeing these things, are there. So this is a little bit bigger one. If you want to take a photo of that, you could. So there are 6 letters that comes from Jerusalem, Adonai-Zedek. By the 6th one, Adonai-Zedek is no longer, and it's the one of the soldiers that sends the letter and says that Adonai-Zedek's not here anymore. So, and he died outside the city. They did not capture Jerusalem until David captured it when he was king. So that's in Joshua 10, Adonai-Zedek, the king of Jerusalem, Adonai-Zedek, the 5 kings of the Amorites, and that's when the day was extended there. So Abdi-Heba, Adonai-Zedek, why do you love the Apru but hate the mayors? The war against me is severe. Lost are the lands of the king, and lost are all the mayors. So he must have been in desperation when they came out of Jerusalem and got the other 5 kings. I'm going backwards here to see if I can go forward. There we go. There is not a mayor remaining to the king. Apru have plundered all the lands. Here's another one. So this is the one from the soldier. I am not a mayor. I'm a soldier of the king, and all the land of the king is lost. All of it has attacked me. I am at war as far as the land of Sirah and as far as Gath and Carmel. Mount Carmel is that area up there, and that's where Elisha took the prophets of Baal up to the mount there, and they had that challenge. The Apru have taken the very cities of the king. Not a single mayor remains. And this one was slain at the city gate. Be informed, my younger brother has become my enemy, entered blah, 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 and pledged himself to the Apru. Am I too far over for the camera, or you can move it? Okay. Since the Apru are stronger than we, get me help. Get me away from the Apru, lest the Apru destroy us. Are you starting to see a pattern? This is from Ashkelon. That was one of the Philistine cities. Oh, and by the way, they say, well, where did the Philistines come from? And people will say that they came after the Israelites came into the land. But in the Bible, it mentions the Philistines before they go in. So before they go in, the Philistines were already there. I am indeed guarding the palace of the king where I am. The Apru are more powerful than we. There's another one. My lord's having written, come pay homage to the king. So evidently he got a letter from Akhenaten wanting him to come and pay him homage, while he's getting all these letters that there's a war and they're all collapsing. And he asked, can I leave the city? The war is severe. They set fire to your cities and your palaces. And in one of the letters, Akhenaten sends to one of the Canaanite cities' governors, he says he got the letter that the war is severe, and then he sends a letter back and he says, well, where's all my gifts? and probably in reference to tax or, treasures and stuff. So your merchants from Egypt were struck down in the attack of the Apru. So you have merchants coming up. And Akhenaten does nothing during his reign. And it seems that there has just been a total collapse of Egypt being able to maintain any authority. If you recall, when the spies go into Jericho, and what does Rahab tell them? She says, they are afraid of you because they know what that you did, your God did to the Egyptians. That had been 40 years before. Look how fast Americans forget. They got a mayor in New York City that's pro-Islam, and did we forget about 2001? and here they're remembering this from 40 years. Be informed I am all alone. Lachish, which is 10 miles as the crow flies from Jerusalem, that the rebel has taken. Be informed that it's hostile. And here it says Jerusalem is hostile, but it could be that Adonizedek had been killed. My king, my lord, sent archers. The Apru rose up, I smote him, only Abdiheba, and that's the Jerusalem king, Abdiheba, or Adonizedek is the same. I have been at war with the Apru. And so the way these are numbered are not necessarily in chronological order. Okay, so we see some of these people have died in some of the letters, or they're no longer. These are the cities that these letters from the Canaanites that mention the Apru. Now, they do have letters that come from other places, but there are 65 letters that come from these 14 cities saying the Apru are coming. They're here. They're taking your lands. They're burning the cities. We need help. Send us archers. And what kind of response? Where's the gifts that you promised me? I told you that they were supposed to take all the way to the land of the river Euphrates, Deuteronomy chapter 1, Deuteronomy 11. They're supposed to go to the Euphrates. They never even get close. They don't even get barely up to Tyre. Let's see. So Tutankhamun is the son of Akhenaten, and supposedly they did where they checked the genes, the DNA test. They did a DNA test. And he is the father of Tutankhamun, but she is not his mother, according to the thing. But they think it might have been Akhenaten's sister to have a male heir. Tutankhamen's wife is his sister. And interestingly, this one here, she writes to the Hittites in Turkey. And by the way, they're not the biblical Hittites. Sorry to tell you that. It was called Hatti land, and the ruler was called Hatti, and that kind of stuck. And when they found it, they thought they had found the Hittites. But the Hittites in the Bible all come from Hebron. Ephron the Hittite, he had owned the cave down there that Abraham purchased. So anyway, she sends a letter, and it's been preserved, and she sent it to the king up there, and they weren't on good terms, but she wanted to marry one of his sons, and I think he had like 6 sons. And so she said, I do not have royal blood to marry here, otherwise I'll have to marry a general. And so he sends ambassadors down and finds out, in fact, the story is true. And so he then sends his son, one of his sons down, I believe the youngest, to marry her. And then they would have some sort of alliance. But the son is murdered en route with the entourage that comes with him. And historians tend to think that the the general got wind of it and murdered him. So that's just kind of a side thing. So Tutankhamun's uncle, Akhenaten's brother, they're about the same age, and so he becomes pharaoh after Tutankhamun dies, and he's only a pharaoh for just a short period of time. And guess what? And that's the Hittite. The general that is under Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Horemheb, he becomes pharaoh. And he's the last pharaoh of the dynasty. And when he dies, he has no heirs. And then his scribe then becomes pharaoh, and that scribe is Ramses the first. And then Sete the first, and then Ramses the second. So they come later. But this is when he comes back to power, he reestablishes the multi-god worship, polytheism, and he recycles blocks from Akhenaten's monument. So he tears down Amarna, and then he dismantles it, he buries it, reorganizes the military because it has been obviously in shambles. He moves the capital back to Thebes. He erases all of this period from Egyptian history that he can do, and then the ones behind him will do. He has no male heir. And then Ramses was Para-Ramses, and then he goes to Ramses. And look at where this, and Tutankhamun has that too. The Heka, the scepter, we talked last night, they take that from the Hyksos, evidently. And it has the blue lines for measuring the grain in the coffers. And you see it now. You see the pharaohs they start doing it during the Tutmosis. And Sennacherib II, for some reason, he strips his pyramid of all of its lime block. Now, why did he pick this pharaoh? Well, it was Sennacherib II that we were thinking last night that Joseph came in that reign and built the canal of Joseph up to Fayum. And that's when the Hyksos started to prosper. And then they subdued them later. So it's kind of interesting, some of the things that go there. And I don't know if I talked to you about the punt ship, but the oldest image of a ship is in this tomb of King Sahura. And if you look at it, it looks like it is held together with rope. It is very primitive. They did a National Geographic special on it, and there was a couple of professors from universities that got together, and they had it made in Egypt. And the way the ancient boats held together was by the swelling of the wood. And that's what kept them afloat. They call it the punt ship. Punt is a place that they went to get spices and other things. They don't know for sure where it was, but they think it was down the coast of Africa. And when they built this thing in the National Geographic, they had to use a lot of ballast. And the guy they hired to sail it was he was a captain of a sailboat, a large sailboat. And he was afraid to do it because he thought it was going to sink. And but he got the hang of it by the end of the program. But it leaked. Now compare that to Moses writing the account of Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark is a perfect seagoing vessel. The Liberty ships in World War II are almost the exact same dimensions of Noah's Ark. 450 feet. Noah's Ark is 75 feet wide. The Liberty ships are like 57 feet wide, and that's the main difference. There are 3 Liberty ships left, and I think only 2 of them run. The movie Titanic is the inside of the ship, and the engine room is the Liberty ship SS Jeremiah O'Brien, which is in San Francisco. They ran it out of San Francisco Harbor, and then they ran the engine backwards to simulate hitting the iceberg. They made nearly 3,000 Liberty ships. They were sunk either by torpedoes or by faulty welding because they were building them so fast. The first ones didn't do well because of the steel that they used when they made them in the Pacific and they took them to the Atlantic and they went up into the North Sea. The steel got brittle, and so they lost some because of that. They didn't lose any due to severe waves or weather, and because they're just so the reason they chose that design is because they were so sturdy. Now, I think that's the end of my presentation, but I want to talk to you about the Liberty ships. So Liberty ships could hold 440 Sherman tanks. They could hold nearly 3,000 Jeeps, multi-million rounds of ammunition. And the height of the Liberty ship, when you look at the deck. So I want to tell you about the line that you see on the ships. You know what that's called? So they'll have like a red paint, and then you can tell how much is on the ship by how far it sets, right? That's called a Plimsoll line, and it's named after the man that did the math to come up the formula for it. The British in the late 1800s losing a lot of ships. And so the public was in an outcry, and what was happening is they were overloading the ships, getting them in high seas, and they'd sink. So Plimsoll came up with a simple formula for them to use, and they've since refined it depending on the salinity of the water. You can cheat in some seas. But the basic formula is 1/2 the height. The Ark, Noah's Ark, is 30 cubits high, so the Plimsoll line would be where? If it's 1/2 the height, it would be 15 cubits, right? And if you want to look this up, I can't think of the chapter and verse, but it's right in there where the waters rising on the earth, and the waters went over the highest mountains by 15 cubits. Where's the Plimsoll line for the Ark? It's 30 cubits, 15 cubits. The Plimsoll line's right there in the Bible. So it prevailed over the highest mountains, 15 cubits. Pretty interesting stuff, I think. And the fact that it is perfect seagoing ratios. So I'll turn off the mic. You can stop recording. And if anyone has any questions. Anybody have a question? What time we're going to get out?